My name is Brittany, and I want to tell you about my messed up family. I have a mom, a dad, and an older sister named Rachel. From the moment I was old enough to understand anything, I knew I was not the favorite child. My parents never even tried to hide it. They would say things like, "Rachel is our special girl," right in front of me. Rachel always got everything first. She got the best things, the newest things, and the most expensive things. When a new iPhone came out, who got it? Rachel. When designer jeans became popular, Rachel had 4 brand new pairs. I wore her old jeans that were already stretched out, faded, and sometimes even torn. When I asked for new clothes, Mom would say, "We already spent our clothing budget on your sister. These ones are perfectly fine." That phrase, "perfectly fine," became the motto of my childhood. Everything I had was perfectly fine, while Rachel got the best of everything. The difference between us was most obvious on Christmas and birthdays. Rachel would get huge piles of expensive gifts, while I would get 3 or 4 small things, usually from the clearance section. When I complained, Mom would say, "We want you to learn the value of money. Rachel needs these things for her advanced classes." It never made sense to me, but they acted like it was a good reason. By the time I was 17, I stopped asking for anything. What was the point? Instead, I got a job at a grocery store. I even lied about my age because I was desperate to earn my own money. I thought that would finally give me a bit of independence. But I was wrong. My parents took my paychecks whenever Rachel needed something. Mom would say, "Rachel needs this more than you. We're teaching you about family loyalty." But it never worked the other way around. I never saw Rachel give up anything for me or for anyone else in the family. It was always me who had to sacrifice. When Rachel graduated from high school, my parents paid for her to go to a fancy private college. They covered everything: full tuition, a nice dorm room, all her meals, and even spending money. It wasn't just a little help. They gave her the dream college experience without her paying a single cent. And me? I was left to figure out my own future. They didn't offer me a college fund, they didn't promise me help, and they didn't even ask about my plans. It was like my life didn't matter as much. I realized that in their eyes, my role in the family was to support Rachel, even if it meant giving up my own dreams. That was the moment I started to understand, if I ever wanted a better life, I would have to fight for it on my own. It must have cost my parents over $100,000 to send Rachel to that private college, but they never complained once about the expense. She got her degree in marketing, or something close to that, but do you know what she did right after graduating? She got married. Just like that. She never worked a single day in the field she studied for. Not one day. All that money, all that education, and she became a stay-at-home wife immediately. Meanwhile, I was left to figure out my own college path. My parents didn't help me financially, not even a little. I applied for every scholarship I could find. I spent hours filling out applications, writing essays, and chasing deadlines. I worked hard in school to make sure my grades were high enough to be considered for good opportunities. Eventually, my hard work paid off. I was accepted to a state college with a full academic scholarship. You'd think my parents would be proud, but they acted like it wasn't a big deal. No congratulations, no celebration. Just a quick, "That's good," and then back to talking about whatever Rachel was doing. I didn't care. I was just happy I could finally leave that house. I moved into the dorms the first chance I got. For the first time in my life, I could breathe without feeling like I was taking up space that belonged to my sister. College wasn't easy. I studied full-time, and I also worked part-time at the campus bookstore to cover my food, books, and personal expenses. I learned how to stretch every dollar and still make it through. While Rachel was living in a big house as a newlywed with no job and no bills to worry about, I was pulling all-nighters to finish projects and studying for exams. My life was about survival and building a future, while hers was about comfort and luxury. After I graduated, I landed a great job at a marketing firm. That's where I met Scott, the man who would eventually become my husband. We started dating, and for the first time in my life, I felt like someone truly saw me, not as Rachel's little sister or the second child, but as a person who mattered. Scott was kind, supportive, and treated me like I was worth something. We dated for 4 years, and during that time, Rachel had 2 kids. She was fully settled into the suburban housewife life, while I was focused on my career and building my relationship with Scott. But of course, Rachel couldn't just let me be happy. Whenever I talked about Scott, she would make these fake sweet comments. "You're so lucky you managed to snag such a rich guy," she'd say with a little smirk. "Wow, you really hit the jackpot there." I'd roll my eyes and tell her, "I didn't go looking for a rich guy, Rachel. It just happened." "Sure it did," she'd reply. "Just happened to find the one man whose family has money. What a coincidence." It made me furious because that wasn't the truth at all. I fell in love with Scott because he was kind, funny, and made me feel like I truly mattered. He listened to me, respected me, and supported my dreams. When we first started dating, I didn't even know anything about his family's money. It wasn't until months later, after we'd been together for a while, that I learned his parents were wealthy. But to Rachel, that didn't matter. She told everyone like it was some big secret I had planned from the beginning. "You always were the smart one," she'd say with a fake smile. "Figured out how to marry up while the rest of us have to work for everything." The comment would have been almost funny if it wasn't so insulting, especially coming from someone who had never worked a single day in her life and whose entire college education was paid for by our parents. Rachel had this talent for twisting things so that she was always the victim and I was always the villain. If she made a rude comment, she'd act like she was just joking and then somehow make me look like the overreacting little sister. Scott noticed it too. At family gatherings, he saw the way she would make sly remarks about me and how my parents would laugh along with her like it was some kind of comedy routine. One night, after a particularly awful family dinner where Rachel spent the whole evening making jokes about how lucky I was to find a rich man, Scott pulled me aside. He looked me in the eye and said, "Your sister is jealous of you. She's had everything handed to her all her life, but now she sees you actually earning something good and she can't stand it." I had never thought about it like that before, but Scott was right. For the first time ever, I had something she didn't have, something she couldn't just take from me or convince our parents to give her instead. Things became even stranger when my parents learned about Scott's family money. I mentioned it casually one day, just that his mom owned a few companies and did some investing. To me, it wasn't a big deal. Scott never acted rich or arrogant. But to my parents, it was like I had just announced I was marrying royalty. The very next Sunday, my dad said, "We think it's time you introduced us to Scott's mother. It's only proper since you two are so serious." His tone wasn't a suggestion, it was an expectation. Against my better judgment, I agreed. I set up a dinner so they could meet. Scott's mom, Janet, turned out to be one of the most impressive women I had ever met. She owned 2 successful companies, invested in startups, and was known for mentoring young entrepreneurs. But despite all her success, she was warm, kind, and completely down to earth. She didn't look down on anyone, and she treated me with genuine respect. The dinner with my parents and Janet was hard to sit through. My parents spent the whole evening asking Janet about her companies, bragging about Dad's business, and dropping hints about how my sister and I would one day inherit everything. By the end of the night, Janet had agreed to look over my dad's business plan and think about investing. A few weeks later, she decided to invest $70,000 into his business. 7 months after that, Scott proposed to me. Both families were happy about the wedding. Janet even offered to split the wedding costs evenly with my parents. That's when my parents started acting strange about money again. One day, Mom told me, "We think you should cover your half of the wedding expenses. We'll pay you back later. Don't worry." I should have known better, but I was so excited about getting married that I agreed. I used almost all my savings, about $25,000, thinking it was just a temporary loan. While we were planning the wedding, my parents kept talking about how expensive everything was, even though Janet was covering half the costs. And, of course, Rachel couldn't stop herself from getting involved. She criticized almost every choice I made. "At my wedding, we had beautiful roses," she'd say. "They were so much prettier than what you picked." I eventually had to tell her to back off because I was starting to think she wanted to ruin things. Finally, the wedding day came. Everything looked perfect. The venue was beautiful, the flowers were exactly what I wanted, and I felt incredible in my dress. For a moment, I thought I might actually get to enjoy my big day. But Rachel couldn't let me have even one day of peace. She followed me around making nasty comments. Just before I walked down the aisle, she whispered, "You know, my wedding was so much better than this." She didn't stop there. During the reception, while I was trying to eat dinner, she leaned over and said, "My wedding dress was so much prettier than yours. And my bridesmaids' dresses were way nicer. These look cheap." It was like she was determined to ruin every happy moment I had. Rachel even started walking up to our relatives and telling them how badly the wedding was organized. I overheard her say to our aunt, "Everything at my wedding was 100 times better. The food tasted better, the music was better, the decorations were more elegant." People were starting to notice her behavior. I could see guests giving her strange looks, like they couldn't believe she was acting this way at her own sister's wedding. But Rachel didn't stop. She picked apart every single detail. The cake wasn't as good as hers. The band wasn't as talented as the one she hired. Even the weather on her wedding day, she claimed, was better. She couldn't find one nice thing to say about my wedding. I was doing my best to enjoy my special day, but she was making it almost impossible. At one point, I felt like I was going to cry right there in front of everyone. That's when Scott came over, put his arms around me and whispered, "Don't listen to her. This is our day, not hers." Then it was time for the toasts. Scott's mom, Janet, stood up with her champagne glass and gave a beautiful speech about love, family, and new beginnings. But then she said something that stunned everyone in the room. "As a wedding gift to my son and my new daughter-in-law," she said, "I'm giving you the house on Maple Street. It's yours, no strings attached." I froze. Did I hear that right? A whole house? I looked at Scott, and he looked just as shocked as I was. Then I glanced over at my parents, and the look on their faces was priceless. They almost choked on their drinks. Their smiles disappeared instantly, and they started whispering to each other in a panic. But Rachel's reaction was even more dramatic. The moment she heard about the house, she got up and ran out of the reception hall without saying a word. She just bolted. All the guests turned their heads, whispering and wondering what had just happened. My dad quickly stood up and tried to cover for her. "Rachel's pregnant," he announced loudly. "She's just emotional and couldn't handle the excitement. You know how it is with pregnancy hormones." People nodded like it made sense, but I could tell they thought the whole thing was strange. I mean, who runs out of a wedding just because someone got a nice gift? About 25 minutes later, I went to the bathroom and heard Rachel talking on the phone in the hallway. "Brittany is so arrogant," she was saying. "She thinks she's better than everyone else. She wanted to make her wedding bigger and better than mine, but she failed." Everything was still tacky. I just shook my head. Even after I got a house as a wedding gift, Rachel still couldn't admit that anything about my wedding was nice. But honestly, I didn't care anymore. I had Scott, I had a new house, and I had a whole new life waiting for me. At the end of the reception, my parents came rushing over. "Brittany, we need to talk to you right now," Mom said, grabbing my arm. "Not now," I told her firmly. "I don't have time for this." Scott and I were leaving straight from the reception for our honeymoon. We had already planned to go straight to the airport, and I wasn't about to let my parents' drama ruin that. "But this is important," Dad said quickly. "It can wait," I replied, taking Scott's hand. "We have a plane to catch." And just like that, we walked away and left for our honeymoon. Whatever they wanted to say could wait until we got back. Maldives was amazing. For 2 whole weeks, I didn't think about my crazy family at all. Scott and I enjoyed every moment, walking on the beach, trying new restaurants, watching sunsets, and talking about our plans for the future in our new house. But all good things eventually end. When we came back to our apartment, we were tired from the long flight. I was ready to unpack slowly, relax, and maybe order some takeout. We hadn't even brought our suitcases inside when there was a loud knock at the door. I opened it and saw my parents standing there, both with serious expressions on their faces. They walked right past me into the apartment before I could even say hello. "We need to talk," Mom said immediately. "No. How was your trip?" "No, welcome home." "Not even congratulations on your marriage." "Just straight to business." "Can we at least get settled first?" I asked. "We just got off the plane." "This can't wait," Dad said firmly. "We've been thinking about this the whole time you were gone. We've made a decision about the house." Mom spoke like she was announcing some big, official decision. "You need to give the house to Rachel. She needs it more than you do." For a moment, I couldn't even speak. When I finally found my voice, I said, "Are you insane?" "Don't take that tone with us," Mom snapped. "We've already thought this through. Rachel has 2 kids, and she's pregnant with a 3rd. She needs more space. You and Scott are young. You both have good jobs. You can buy your own house later." "This is our house," I said, raising my voice. "Janet gave it to us. It was our wedding gift. You can explain to Scott's mother that family comes first for you," Dad said. "We've already decided you'll help your sister because that's the kind of person you are." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They actually wanted me to lie to Janet and make it seem like giving away our house was my idea. "We've already been to look at the house," Mom added casually. "It's perfect for Rachel's family. 5 bedrooms, a big backyard for the kids." "Wait," I interrupted. "You went to our house without asking us?" "We wanted to make sure it would work for Rachel before talking to you," Dad said, like it was no big deal. So they'd gone inside my house, looked around, and treated it like they were shopping for Rachel. The nerve of these people was unbelievable. That's when Scott walked into the living room. He had been in the kitchen, and from the look on his face, I could tell he'd heard every word. "What's going on?" he asked, though he clearly already knew. "We're explaining to Brittany that she needs to give the house to her sister," Mom told him. Then she looked at him and added, "You should support this decision as her husband." Scott stared at them like they had lost their minds. "You want us to give away our wedding gift?" "It's the right thing to do," Dad said. "I'll talk to your mother myself and explain why this is necessary." I saw Scott's face change instantly. He went from looking confused to looking absolutely furious. "Normal parents would never ask their daughter to do something like this," Scott said, his voice getting louder. "Don't tell us how to parent," Dad snapped. "You're new to this family, and you need to understand how we do things." Scott spoke slowly and clearly. "If you don't leave our apartment right now, I'm calling the police." My parents looked at me, waiting for me to tell Scott to calm down, but I didn't say a word. For the first time in my life, someone was standing up for me against them. "This isn't over, Brittany," Mom said as they walked toward the door. "The only thing I regret is letting you into my apartment," I replied. After they left, Scott and I sat on the couch in silence. I was shaking with anger and disbelief. "I knew your parents were strange from your stories," Scott finally said, "but I never imagined they were this extreme." A few hours later, my phone rang. It was Janet. "Hi, sweetie," she said, but she sounded confused. "I just got the strangest call from your mother. She told me you wanted to give the house to your sister and that you'd already agreed to it." My heart sank. They had actually called Janet and lied to her. "She said you've always loved Rachel so much that you decided to help her this way," Janet continued. "But that doesn't sound like something you'd do without talking to Scott and me first." I started crying right there on the phone. "I didn't agree to anything," I sobbed. "I had no idea they were going to call you." "Oh, honey, what's really going on?" Janet asked gently. So I told her everything, how my parents had ambushed us the minute we got home, how they demanded we give the house to Rachel, how they had already gone to look at the house without our permission. I told her about Rachel's jealousy and how my parents had always favored her over me. Janet listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment before speaking firmly. "Brittany, sweetheart, don't you worry about this for 1 second. I'm going to handle this myself." "What do you mean?" I asked. Just trust me, Janet said. Your parents have made a very big mistake, and they're about to learn there are consequences for trying to manipulate my family. Janet's voice had an edge I'd never heard before. She was always sweet and kind, but now she sounded serious, like she meant business. Thank you, I whispered. You don't need to thank me, she said. You're my daughter-in-law now, and nobody messes with my family. Nobody. After I hung up, Scott asked, what did she say? She said she's going to handle it, I told him. Good, Scott said with a hard look. Because your parents just made a very powerful enemy, and they have no idea what's coming. I felt relieved knowing Janet was on our side, but I was also nervous about what this would mean for my relationship with my parents. Not that we had much of a relationship to begin with, but this felt like the point of no return. Part of me felt guilty for dragging Janet into my family drama, but a bigger part of me was just grateful that someone was finally standing up for me. 3 weeks passed without a word from my parents or Rachel. I started to think maybe they'd finally gotten the message and would leave us alone. Scott and I were busy preparing to move into our new house, and for the first time in months, I was actually happy. Then Janet called. Brittany, honey, I wanted to let you know what happened with your father's business, she said. I organized an investor meeting yesterday. I told your father I was withdrawing all my money from his company immediately, and I advised the other investors to do the same. My stomach dropped. Oh no, what did he say? I explained exactly why I was pulling out, Janet continued. I told him I only invested in his company because you and Scott were in a serious relationship, and I wanted to support my future daughter-in-law's family. Her voice was calm, but there was strength in every word. I also told him that his company had been barely breaking even for 4 years, and that he'd never managed to turn a real profit. The only reason his business was still running was because of my investment and the other investors I brought in. What else did you tell him? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. I told him that he and your mother had shown incredibly poor judgment, Janet said firmly. That they didn't appreciate the good relationship they could have had with our family, and that they'd treated you badly your entire life. I also made it clear they hadn't even thought about the future of your children with Scott. I could already picture the look on my father's face during that conversation. Janet told me she figured my dad probably thought he could charm her into changing her mind. But then she told him something that ended it for good. She said she would never support their family again in any way. The other investors followed my lead and pulled their money too, Janet finished. After that call, things were quiet for a few days. Then the harassment began. My parents started calling me nonstop, leaving angry voicemails and sending cruel text messages. They blamed me for ruining my dad's business and destroying the family. One day, Mom even showed up at our apartment, pounding on the door and screaming at me to fix everything immediately. You did this on purpose, she shouted through the door. You wanted revenge, and now you've gotten it. I told her to leave or I'd call the police. She kept yelling, so I actually did call. She left before they arrived, but not before saying, "You're dead to me." Then Rachel joined in. She sent me text after text, accusing me of ruining everything for her family. She said I was selfish and vindictive, that I destroyed her children's future just because I was jealous of her. The messages got nastier and more personal. Rachel called me every name you can think of. She said I was a terrible sister and had always been jealous. She claimed I'd planned the whole thing from the start, that I'd manipulated Scott's family to get back at them. It was exhausting and honestly scary. My family had always treated me badly, but I'd never seen them act like this before. Finally, Scott had enough. After listening to one especially vicious voicemail from my father, he said, "We're getting a lawyer." The lawyer sent my parents and Rachel an official cease, and is this letter. It warned them that if they kept harassing us, we would take them to court and get a restraining order. The letter listed all the threatening calls, texts, and visits, and made it clear that we were keeping records of everything. After they got that letter, it was like someone flipped a switch. The harassment stopped completely. No calls, no texts, no visits. Just total silence. A few months later, Janet told me what had happened to my dad's business. His company collapsed only weeks after the investors pulled out. She said he had to declare bankruptcy and sell most of his things to pay off debts. Your parents are living on their pension now, plus whatever small savings they had left, Janet explained. They can't afford to keep helping Rachel's family anymore. This was huge news. For years, my parents had been paying Rachel's rent and giving her family extra money every month. Rachel had never worked, and her husband didn't make enough to keep up the lifestyle they were used to. Rachel's family had to move to a much smaller apartment, Janet told me. They can't afford the big place your parents were paying for anymore. Now, Rachel's husband's salary is all they have. I later learned that Rachel had to give up her gym membership, her weekly nail appointments, her expensive clothing shopping, and all the other luxuries my parents had been funding for her. For the first time in her life, she actually had to live within her means. My parents also had to change their lifestyle. They sold their big house and moved into a small condo. Dad got rid of his fancy car and bought a used one. Mom stopped her weekly spa trips because she couldn't afford them anymore. Honestly, I didn't feel sorry for any of them. They had created this whole mess by being greedy and manipulative. If they had just been happy for me, happy that I'd found a good husband and received a generous wedding gift, none of this would have happened. But instead, they tried to take my house and give it to Rachel, just like they had taken everything else from me my whole life. They even lied to my mother-in-law and tried to manipulate her, too. They pushed too far, and this time, they finally faced the consequences. Scott and I have been living in our beautiful house for over a year now, and we're happier than ever. We've cut off all contact with my family, and honestly, my life is so much more peaceful without their constant drama and controlling behavior. Janet has become like a real mother to me. She treats me with the love and respect my own parents never gave me. When we told her we were trying to have a baby, she was thrilled. She hugged me and couldn't stop smiling. That's the kind of reaction normal parents have when they hear good news about their children's lives. Sometimes people ask if I miss my family or feel bad about what happened to them. The truth is, I don't miss the stress. I don't miss the manipulation. I don't miss always feeling like I wasn't good enough. I don't miss being treated like I was less important in my own family. My parents and Rachel made their choices. They chose to treat me badly my whole life. They chose to try to take my wedding gift. They chose to lie and manipulate when things didn't go their way. They chose to harass us when we stood up to them. And I finally made my choice. I chose myself. I chose my husband, my new family, and my own happiness. I have never regretted that choice for even one day. Some people say family is everything, but I've learned that the family you choose can be so much better than the one you're born into. Scott and Janet have shown me what real love and real support look like. That's worth more than any relationship with people who only see you as someone to use and control.